Hatcher from Precision Photonics. Brad is an associate clinical professor at the University of Colorado School of Law and the director of entrepreneurial initiatives for the Silicon Coherence Center. He leads the Law School of Entrepreneurial Law Clinic and the Samuelson Glasgow Technology Law and Policy Clinic. Sally Hatcher is president and founder of Precision Photonics, a Boulder-based company, and a spin-off of it, Biodiagnostics. She studied at Southern Methodist University and here also at the University of Colorado School of Law. And before founding Precision Photonics, she worked for McKinsey and Company as a consultant and for the State of Colorado Attorney General Office as an Assistant Attorney General. So thank you both for coming. All yours.
Thanks for having us. Move this over so we don't get in the way. Okay, so I understand this is by far the most intellectually challenging talk of the series from Ariel. Hopefully it'll be kind of fun for the next hour. I think Sally and I both recognize that this one's a little bit not like the others in terms of talks. We're both happy to optimize this to respond to questions that you might have, so just jump in. In terms of what we're going to do for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to proceed in three parts. First is I'm going to do something that brings together some of the academic literature around what goes into an entrepreneurship scene and tie some of those factors to what you see in and around Boulder and the Front Range. So that's a broad framework. And then second, Sally's going to talk about her experience in connection with precision photonics, which I think is going to be a terrific case study, which many of you could at least identify with or will find interesting in terms of the technology that's at the core of what they do and the way that they've built a business around that. And then third, we'll talk about if you're interested in potentially starting a company or maybe working for an emerging company in the area, what are 5 general thoughts and suggestions that you might want to know at the outset? I'm going to offer those up, and I've encouraged Sally to disagree, concur, or violently agree as the case may be. So that's what we've got in mind, and we'll try to save about 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A if that works, but like I said, don't necessarily feel like you need to wait. Okay, so with that in mind, just quickly, I am with the Silicon Flatiron Center, as Ariel said. We are housed physically in the law school. We're oriented around information communication technology. This is not our branding effort, by the way. That's just poor PowerPoint translation. Originally, Silicon Flatirons was a telecom policy shop, and to this day maintains a fairly high profile in front of the Federal Communications Commission, and to a lesser degree, the Federal Trade Commission. But about 3 or 4 years ago, we branched out in 2 different directions. One is around intellectual property, privacy, and security. We have an interesting set of initiatives around that. And the third is what I'm going to be talking about today, and that's the entrepreneurship initiative. And it's premised on this, that this is a world-class place to start a business. And we've never really fully synced up the surrounding resources of the Front Range emerging company community with the university, and what we've been trying to do is do what we can to facilitate those connections and create a little bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit across campus. So that's where I'm coming from. Okay, so what makes an area fertile for starting new businesses? This is a question of innovation architecture, and I think that there's 3 factors that are worth highlighting when you look at the academic literature around this. One is you need a strong creative class. We'll be talking about that. The good news for you there is you're part of it. The second is, or at least we say you're part of it. And the second is critical mass, ideally of the creative class types of folks. And third is a networked ecosystem. Let's start with discussion of the creative class a little bit. One of the interesting things is you might think in a broadband age that if you've got a computer and an internet connection, location becomes irrelevant. So that's sort of the Thomas Friedman world is flat view of the world. What the work of economic geographers is showing is, interestingly, if anything, the opposite seems to be true in some respects. That is, clustering in creative centers has accelerated. And Boulder seems to be one of those places where there's a lot of clustering activity. Now, whether this will continue into the future or not remains to be seen. Certainly broadband is a game changer for certain locations and is expanding the horizons. But what you're seeing is within countries, such as the United States, certain hotspots are emerging, right? Obviously, first place that you probably think of for technology and innovation? Silicon Valley, second place?
Boston.
Yeah, Route 128, Boston, and then you've got Austin, Seattle, Boulder in that conversation, San Diego maybe, and you're seeing that same clustering phenomenon in other countries. Interesting to think about why that is. Okay, so in terms of creative class, as I said, the good news is you're part of the Cool Kids Club. This gets defined as scientists and engineers, university professors, this is good to me, artists, other thought leaders, creative professionals who work in knowledge-intensive industries. These are the creative people who throw off ideas that could potentially be disruptive and create new markets. Boulder additionally has the merit that it values creative class people, the kind of person that says there's 6.9 billion people on the planet, but I've got an idea that's going to change the world, right? I mean, many places think that that's probably crazy, but Boulder is the kind of place that not only tolerates, but seems to encourage this. There's a New York Times Magazine article on Boulder entitled 25 Square Miles Surrounded by Reality. There's some truth in this. And an interesting thing is that the literature is showing that oddness and innovation are connected, that actually new businesses tend to flourish in a place where weirdness is okay. Paul Graham, who started an entity called Y Combinator, has a quote that a place that tolerates oddness in the search for the new is exactly what you want in a startup hub, because most good startup ideas seem a little bit crazy. Right? Really, Boulder's not a conformist culture that fits well, and not surprisingly, you have a tradition of entrepreneurship across a few different sectors here that is worth being aware of. So around natural foods, Celestial Seasonings is out of Boulder, Wild Oats, Izzy Beverages, White Wave, all those out of the Boulder Front Range area. Additionally, around storage, the group that I met with before, we were talking about this a little bit, you've got IBM throwing off storage tech, and storage tech bequeathing a long line, really a family tree of companies that's just been terrific for the Front Range over the last 30 years there. And then additionally, you've got an internet software scene here that started in the mid-90s and is now on its second or third generation of companies. Again, a terrific tradition of entrepreneurship here, and that really feeds on itself. Okay, so that's the creative class portion of one of the key ingredients to a startup scene. A second is critical mass. And in terms of what I want to emphasize here, is that it turns out that taking new ideas and innovating off of them is a collaborative sport. Team is key for a successful startup. So the iconic vision of an individual working in his or her garage as the secret sauce tends not to be the case. Most startups, good idea to get at least another co-founder on board and maybe a team of 3 or 4, and being in a place where you can form those kinds of strong teams is important. There's a second important dimension to having critical mass of people, which is that entrepreneurship is also a mentorship sport. And maybe I'll actually stop and ask whether Precision Photonics was able to benefit from this or not in Boulder. But in terms of a mentorship sport, what I mean by that is really helpful along the way to be able to regularly interface with people for whom this is not their first rodeo. Right? And one terrific thing I'll highlight about Boulder is this is very much a coffee culture where you can pretty much get a coffee with anybody in town. You might have to wait a month or two in terms of their calendar, but there's just an expectation among people in the startup community here that you help somebody who's coming along because someone probably helped you beforehand. And that really starts at the top. In terms of mentorship, was Precision Photonics, did you guys benefit from any mentorship on the front end?
Not as much in the early days, though I would say these days you can absolutely call Bernthal, Catherine Marigold. Personal friend is Dan Friedlander, who's been CEO multiple times and is now going so green. Any solar application, any green application, he's at the forefront of it. Just give him a call. So
So you get this combination in Boulder that if you're interested in doing something, there's traditions of entrepreneurship across many sectors, combined with the expectation that people should be willing to help you. And if they're not, please let me know, because I'd like to know who they are. But people really do have a helpfulness about them, and that's where critical mass also is important. The concentration of the creative class, in terms of reaching critical mass, there's some interesting data points. In terms of explaining it, you probably could think of some of the reasons for this. Research universities, CU system, School of Mines, Colorado State, the federal labs being here is an important thing. And then additionally, this throws off a virtuous cycle where bigger companies and their research facilities see the creative class of talent here, reaching critical mass, and they increasingly move their research here. So I don't know if you've seen Google's going to take out Circuit City and expand their research capacity in Boulder, which could be a good thing for some of you. From a startup perspective, it'll be great until Google starts to poach their talent, but we'll see how that works. Overall, though, that is a part of the virtuous cycle of critical mass of creative class of people. A couple data points. Boulder was ranked by Forbes in 2008 as the most educated city in America. For anyone who's ever spoken with a barista at Starbucks who tends to have 2 or 3 degrees, that's not surprising. And then in terms of per capita concentration of software engineers, Boulder County has the highest concentration of software engineers per capita in the nation. And so we are arguably #1 when it comes to geeks. So that's underscoring the fact that we've got creative mass. And as I said, there's this interesting trend that rather than entrepreneurship being flattened, there's actually an increased amount of clustering that's being seen. And this is language of Richard Florida, who's an economic geographer that you'll sometimes see quoted in this area. I want to highlight one final piece. So we've talked about creative class. We've talked about critical mass of that in this area. But the third is really, I think, the secret sauce, and that is, do you have an entrepreneurial, horizontal, networked ecosystem? What's that mean? Well, when I asked the first place that you think about in terms of entrepreneurial scenes, I think everyone said Silicon Valley, right? Had I asked that question circa 1985, it would have been a more interesting question to ask, and we probably would have heard a split between Silicon Valley and Boston. Anno Saxenian, who runs the information school at Berkeley, asked that question in her dissertation research. She said, why, given the fact that Boston and Silicon Valley were virtually neck and neck in the mid-'80s, did Silicon Valley far outpace Route 128 in Boston in the late 80s and early 90s to the point where in the mid-90s you just said game over, just completely different systems? That was her question. And she explained it in terms of a networked ecosystem. And what she's onto there is that she noticed in her research that in Silicon Valley, you have a horizontal ecosystem that's defined by porous boundaries between companies and regular information sharing across companies. Okay? As opposed to in Boston, where you had a vertically integrated culture, which was defined by strong hierarchies within the company organization, as well as strong boundaries between the companies. So if you guys were at different companies, there's not an expectation in Boston that you'd be sharing information across company boundaries, whereas in Silicon Valley, those information spillovers between firms were just part of the culture. Okay? So are you with me in terms of the distinction between a horizontal culture and a vertical culture? Well, the horizontal culture of Silicon Valley allowed for the kind of information spillovers, collaboration, and rapid assembly of talent into new companies that ultimately allows the Valley to take off in the 90s while Route 128 really languished behind. And this theme plays really well in Boulder in terms of what we talked about before. That's a very collaborative culture, one that I think is decidedly horizontal, not vertical. I've decided that it's really a 20% community involvement culture where a lot of the leaders that I'm interacting with are really dedicating at least 20% of their time to community-based activities. Now, there's definitely self-interest in it for them, but that's just sort of the way things are in this area, and I think you can leverage that. So there's 3 factors we talked about that are just generally present in the literature that you see in Boulder that I think helps explain why this is a world-class place to start a business. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's still hard, but I think you can leverage some of those resources in terms of maximizing your chances of making your business work. And with that, I'm delighted to have Sally here to talk about the Precision Photonics story. There's nothing quite like a concrete story of starting a company, and Sally's got that.
I'll be your specimen.
Yeah.
So, how do I use this? Just click OK?
Yep.
Okay. So hi everybody, I'm Sally Hatcher, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my story because it's kind of fun to think about where you can go from here. So I was in law school. Back in law school, I started dating this guy over in Gilla, and he was working in Carl Wyman's lab, and Carl Wyman won the Nobel. So you can imagine that I didn't see this guy a lot for the first couple of years. But he graduated from Gilla, got his PhD there, and then my husband Chris Myatt went over to NIST and worked as a postdoc over there working on the atomic clocks. So after he got out of there, I was down working for the Attorney General's office as a lawyer, saving the planet with environmental law. And Chris worked in industry for a year and kept coming home saying, I've got these really different ideas. You know, when people are making optics for lasers, it's the master German optician. There's only one guy in the entire company who knows how to make it. He's really cranky, pain in the butt, and you know, we have to treat him really nice, and he sits in the corner and does exactly what he wants so he can make these one-off optics that are really difficult and therefore very expensive. And I want to figure out how to be able to mass produce these things and to make these cheap enough so that I can make them in high volume and compete with China. So I said, sure, great idea, I'll go start a company. Well, he kept coming home and saying, I need to incorporate, I need to get a lease, I need HR. So we ended up starting the company together, and in 2000, we founded a telecom company called Precision Photonics. Well, you may or may not remember that in 2001 was the great nuclear winter of telecom, and we realized how massively we had overbuilt, and we had black fiber everywhere, and nobody needed anything. So we went from an early launch of doing great to 70% of our customers went out of business. And for 2 years, nobody bought anything. So from there, we diversified, and today, Precision Photonics, we manufacture really high-end optics typically for a huge variety of industries. Just like most other places, if you can diversify, if you can sell to more than one customer, if you can sell to more than one industry, you're a lot stronger. So that's what we've done.
Over to the right, there's going to be a mirror on that.
Got it. Okay, so basically we founded ourselves as a John Deming company, which is to say that if you measure it, you can improve it. So as a team, sure enough, we started off with another guy who was another postdoc out of Jan Hall's lab and said, hey, you want to start this company? So very early we brought on a team of just people who like to solve really tough measurement problems. So we raised funds, we went out to California, we went to Silicon Valley, and we cold called the biggest guy in the industry. And we just wanted to talk to him, you know, we just like a few minutes of your time. He walked out, said, let me hear this, walks back in, comes out with his team all together and said, we want to invest. We'll give you $3 million today. We said, we don't want $3 million, we'll take the whole company, but we want some part of that. So we actually got funded by Milton Chang, who has continued to be a wonderful investor and really our mentor. So it is, if you do set out to do this, it is critical that choose the people you work with. It will matter to you. You must choose investors who are going to treat you right and treat you fairly and be a part of your team. If you don't, it's so explosive, and you spend all of your time managing your investor rather than managing the company. So what do we have now? We've got about 55 employees over our two businesses. I'll talk about this second in a minute. We've got about 30,000 square feet of manufacturing space and clean rooms, and we serve all these different industries. The cool thing that we do today is we make these wavelength blocker things that go inside a tunable laser. We were making these in 2001, and we managed to hang on through the telecom fallout. We are still arguably the world leader creating these things. We ship up to 30,000 a month of them, and we ship them to China. So that's our claim to fame, is that we're able to take these one-off pieces and mass manufacture them so that we can successfully compete on our tight tolerances and our pricing to actually compete in the world market. stuff that would actually kind of interest you guys, but I'm not going to go into it really detailed. We do a huge amount of advanced metrology. So if you have a really tough optical problem, people tend to come to us because we do a lot of value-add consulting to help solve your laser problem. So if you need plus or minus arc second, if you need 0.1 nanometer precision on your absolute conventional control, that's the kind of stuff that we do every day. Figuring out how to solve problems like for the medical industry. So somebody had a laser that they were putting in for making a LASIK system, and their laser was running too hot. So they came to us, and we were able to redesign the optic to go into the laser, and it immediately dropped their thermal control. It dropped their temperature between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius, which is huge. So all of a sudden this thing works much better, and they're rushing to us with all their business, and we're now a sole source supplier for that company. So that's the kind of very hard problem we like to solve.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
How many people know in here what an arc second is? Hands? This is the smartest audience I've ever spoken to. That was amazing.
And that's why I'm not going to talk in detail about all the cool stuff we do, but if you are interested, I'd love to turn you on to our engineers, and you can hear all about it. We do a lot of, this is really tiny, that's a penny. That has 4 different optics optically bonded together. There's no glue in there, and there are coatings in there, so this thing is 4 different pieces, and you can see how small it is. So we do all kinds of different stuff. This is a hero piece that's up in Fort Collins in CSU. It's been clad on all 6 sides to hold the optic in place with optical bonding, and then dropped into liquid nitrogen, where they run a super high power laser through it. So we do a lot of very high-end sort of stuff. If you're looking for a job after school, we have 3 openings right now, 2 more coming up. So be sure to check us out. I want to talk really briefly about Envio, because what we see ourselves as is a technology or an idea generator. When you come out of a place like CU, we feel like we've got a lot of good ideas. And so one business was making these very high-end optics that are kind of these hero projects. Then we went the other way and said, we're looking at medical diagnostics, and they're expensive, and their laser work is just not that good compared to what we've now seen for the last 10 years. So we turned it around and said, can we start making rapid tests that maintain the sensitivity and specificity of the gold standard, but are cheap enough that we can mass produce them and take them into the developing world? So can we make an AIDS test cheap enough to go into Mozambique and replace what they're currently doing and get everyone tested? And the answer from our point of view is yes. So we have taken the ideas of precision photonics, and we've now spun them off into this second company. Golly, it's a lot of fun. We're now up to, I think, about 18 people on that side. We've raised a bunch of money from the federal government. You too can do this. It's called the Small Business Innovative Research Program. There's a lot of money that the federal government has to spend on small businesses, and they might as well spend it on us. So we pitched and won quite a number of grants for saying that we want to do basically multi-panel testing on rapid tests. So we want to be able to make a 10-minute test that has about 6 different diseases on it. Dirt floor, 6th grade level education for $1 a test. And so that's what we've pitched, and that's what we've been funded on, and that's what we still think that we can pretty well hit that 6 years later. Again, what's cool is that we took the same ideas that we had at the beginning, and we spun them out into a second business. So we've, obviously, if you're in physics or engineering and you want to go into biotech, don't go alone. Find somebody who knows what they're doing. So I cold called the head of infectious diseases at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. This was 6 years ago, and I just said, can I please speak to one of your grad students? Oh no, come down and speak to me. And we went down and spoke to this guy, and his name's Chip Schooley. He's kind of unbelievable. He's run the AIDS clinical trials group for the National Institute of Health. He's just Mr. Big. And he not only took our call, he had us come in, sit down, and he talked to us for an hour. And we got out of there, and we had understood, I think, out of every 5 words, there was at least one I didn't understand. And so we were writing down all these microphage words that just made no sense whatsoever and trying to make the jump from physics to biology. He really helped us do it. Through him, through his prestige and through his acumen, we were able to get the funding that we needed. And this is what we see, is that in the long run, this kind of rapid testing is going to be available everywhere. It could be in Kenya, it could be in Mozambique, but it's equally likely to be right here in the US. So this is just to show you, this is our new design of our device. Right now we're testing for HIV-1 and HIV-2. We're looking at the co-infections as well, which is in Mozambique in particular, hepatitis B and C, and syphilis. So we also turn it around and are able to use the optics to look for cell counting, which is a totally different application. But because we come at it from the physics side, we're actually able to use pretty much the same box to do a very different kind of function. So, okay, so that's you. Great. So that's it. That's my story about how you can go from sitting right here to building your own company. It's possible.
That's going to segue really nicely. So let me give you, this is my 6th year leading the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic, and we started about 15 to 20 companies per year. So I've started to have some pattern recognition on these items, and with that in mind, I'm hoping that this will be a helpful list of 5 suggestions that if you're thinking about getting involved with a startup or perhaps doing your own company, and then I'm also hopeful that we can apply each of these prisms to precision photonics and what fits with your experience versus what is categorically wrong and you don't want anybody walking out believing it's the right way. I make for a fun discussion. So 5 quick ones. One is your idea is wrong. 2nd, business execution is what's disruptive. Technology is enabling. 3rd, no one goes it alone. Use mentors. 4th, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, you are not instantly bankable. And 5th, use the campus as resources. We'll talk about some of that as we go along. So first, your idea is wrong. The emphasis here is actually, it couldn't have gone better in terms of, not that your idea was wrong, but I mean, this is typical of, the market changed. It wasn't that the technology was wrong or the idea was wrong, but when you've got 70% of your customers going away virtually overnight, it must have been over the course of what, 6 months?
Less than that.
No. You need to adjust, right? And seasoned investors will tell you this: bet the team, not the idea. Bet the team, not the idea. And the reason for that is when the market changes, a great team with good technology will figure out how to make that adjustment. And they'll move from telecom into measurements, or from the physics underlying technology, find an interesting and novel bio-application for it. Okay? So your idea is wrong. What does that militate in favor of? Get a great team. It is the most important thing that you can do. Now, that leads to the question, how do you get a great team?
Before that.
All right, go.
How were you funded during the telecom bust?
Huh?
How were you funded at that time?
Well, so we closed on our funding. We were promised the funding in November. We closed on the funding in May, early May. So first there's a 6-month lag between when they say they'll fund you and when they do fund you. We should probably not have gotten that first funding in May because the telecom crash started in about February. But we got it in May, and then we saw it coming. So we just, at that point, we knew we were going to get no more money. So we just hunkered down. We quit hiring. We started reducing everything in size. I literally started counting pens and pencils and not letting people buy stuff. So that's how we made it through, was just simply riding the coattails of what we had before and starting to build business in new areas.
Was it VC?
Oh my gosh, it was ridiculous. It took years off my life.
So we're going to come back to that when we talk about bankability, and I also want to talk a little bit about the grant aspect as well.
Yeah.
But before we leave team, if you're interested in doing this, there's 2 directions to come at it from. One is you've got an idea, but you need pieces of your team to complete. So for example, Guinea, right? Let's say that Guinea's got an idea. She doesn't have, do you have deep domain expertise around business? Feasibility analysis and developing a business plan, is that your bailiwick of expertise? No. Okay, so she needs to get a business person onto this team, right? Additionally, maybe she needs intellectual property protection and some legal analysis. Might be worth thinking about getting a JD or an attorney onto your team, right? So you can think about different skill sets that you need as part of that team. One thing that's kicking off on campus on Wednesday at 6 o'clock in Atlas is the New Venture Challenge. This is styled as the Entrepreneurial Launchpad. The URL is there, cunvc.org. You can go, register, we'll push out more information about it than you want. This is it's styled as a competition, and it is in the sense that there's about $25,000 worth of prizes in it. But it's really about the process of learning how to build a business. There's a series of 6 or 7 workshops that we'll have every couple weeks. It's free to get involved. If you have a team that's doing this, we will find a mentor for you in the community that's in a similar space that will help you with your business plan. And then the culmination is in early March. We have a cross-campus business plan competition, which turns out to be an excuse to do a couple parties, and we do ultimately have a winner. But it's really about the process. So if you're interested in doing this and you're having the reaction, but where would I start? I think the New Venture Challenge is an excellent point of entry, and that will allow you to meet some people from different disciplines that if you're looking to round out a team, that's at least a point that you might want to think about starting with. Second, business execution is disruptive, technology is enabling. So what am I on to there? This is actually a point that I see fairly frequently in academics where, so I'm sure your husband didn't have this attitude, but the attitude of some technologists is, look, I've broken my back in the lab to get this technology where it is. This company wouldn't exist but for my technology. Therefore, I should own almost all the technology, and the valuation may not be Google-like, but it's probably about half of that. Okay? None of those things are going to be the case. Okay? And in terms of the perspective that you just have to understand where people are going to come from, it dovetails with idea number one, that your idea is wrong, and that business execution, no matter how great the technology is going to be difficult. And that is going to be something that's going to be assessed in terms of the valuation of your company. And just understand that you're probably not going to be able to keep 100% ownership if you're going to be taking on outside funding. Interested in your perspective on this when you were doing it.
I'm 100% there. This is really something to think about if you want to start a business, is think about how small can you go at first. Try to prove out your idea. Try to do a lot of work before you try to bring in some kind of venture funding. Because one thing to be really clear on is that venture capitalists believe that their money is what makes you survive, and it is worth everything. And you're a nice person, but it's their company. So as an example, in Envio, Envio's been going 6 years, and it's built on this 10-year technology. We've got a string of patents. We've got everything you can think of. And if we went for a venture capital round today, they would still want 50% of our company for a relatively little amount of money, for enough money to get us to the next stage, which is crazy. We put 6 years in, and they still want half the company for $5, $10, $20 million, and that's not enough to get anywhere in biotech. So the same would be true in any kind of engineering, software, and so forth. The more that you can do on your own up front, the much better off you're going to be.
A second aspect of this is, in addition to the New Venture Challenge, where would you find people who can help you on the business execution side? Sally and I were brainstorming a few ideas on the way in. I'll list a couple that you might write down if you're interested. One is Dave Giltner with the Photonics Association of Colorado.
CPIA, Colorado Photonics Industry Association.
He was a speaker last semester.
Yeah, so did anyone see Dave speak? In terms of connections into the industry, I would think that Dave would be favorable. Also in town, there is the Boulder Innovation Center, which can do some matching. And then additionally, through Silicon Flatirons, we've got multiple points of entry to the startup community. It tends to be a lot of software startups, but you can often tunnel your way into areas that are going to be directly relevant to your expertise. Who else would you talk to?
Or what? Or what exactly?
They're looking to build out a team or at least get ideas on the business execution side.
So you're going to network with people like me as an example. So I hang out with a group of women entrepreneurs, and there are at least 15 of them who like to act as consultants to small businesses. That's a really common thing for people to do here, is after you've been working for 15 or 20 years, you might want to take some time off or step back, and there's a lot of consultants who are willing to help you. So that's a really good way to go. Some of them might charge regular rates, and some of them might be willing to work for equity. So for stock in your company, they'll be able to help you put together the things that you need. So I think also, I don't know what the resources are at the business school, but I continue to hear that there's assistance over there if you need it.
Yeah, so in the business school, there's two directions you can go. One is there is a consulting entity where you pay a discounted rate to MBA students who can help you do what's called a feasibility analysis, which will be along the lines of you've got the technology and they're trying to figure out whether there's a market for that technology and what that might look like. Additionally, the tech transfer office on campus will sometimes fund a feasibility analysis around your research. And so you can also go through the tech transfer office and they will help make that happen as well.
Just be aware that the difference between the value of your research project versus the value of what the company's going to have to put in to get that into a real product, there's actually a world of difference there. So what feels like you just spent 5 years of your life slaving on, it's not going to look the same from the other side of the table, because they're going to explain to you the hundreds of thousands of dollars they're going to have to spend to make it into a product. So again, be aware of what the real value is of what you've got. Your real value is in your brain.
Point number 3, no one goes it alone. Use mentors. So I think I beat this horse already, but this is a great place to do it, and don't try to reinvent the wheel. Use mentors, find out where you're going wrong, get adjustments, soak up as much as you can in this area. I thought it was interesting that it sounds like with both your companies, the first one, that Milton Chang, an investor, turned out to be a fantastic mentor. And then it sounds like Robert, is it Schooley? Schooley on the bio side turned out to be a terrific mentor as well.
Yes.
Any reasons why those worked, except beyond the fact that they were terrific minds?
They're generous with their time, and they've done it before. So, as an example, Milton has funded like 20 companies. JDSU, he was an early investor. He founded New Focus and took that public. At one point, that was worth $1.5 billion. He took Newport public. So if you can find somebody who has done it all before and who is willing to spend the time with you, that's what we've been very lucky with. But I would say we're lucky. I think everybody can do that. You have to go out and look for them, and they're there.
And the other thing distinguished or expert mentor can give you is a signal to others in the industry that I've spoken with Sally and I can vouch for her, which especially as a young fledgling startup can be important with respect to who might be contracting with you as an early customer, who wants to go work for you, in terms of if you think about a startup situation where often the full payment is not in cash and someone's getting part of the company in equity as part of their compensation package, it's a leap of faith to work for a startup, right? So to the extent you can get somebody of high reputation to come say, this is a great idea, there's all sorts of benefits that can attend that in addition to the wisdom of the mentor. Number 4, and this circles back to your question in terms of funding. If you're a first-time entrepreneur, you're not instantly bankable. There's exceptions to this, but I think by and large this is what I'm seeing in the area right now. And it might be worth just quickly walking through different sources of financing and elaborate on how you guys made it work. So the first is we've got this, I think we've made somewhat of an iconic myth out of get $5 million of venture capital money and turn that around and build the next Facebook, which is one way to build a company. But especially if it's your first company, I don't think we've made enough of the individual who bootstraps, is resourceful, and self-funds either all the way or at least to a certain point. And you were talking about that with respect to MBio. That's essentially what you guys have done. Is that right, in terms of bootstrapping it? The great thing is, in terms of retaining control of MBio, Sally retains control. And in terms of equity ownership, she and the company own 100%, I suspect, at this point. So to the extent you can, I encourage you to think about that first. Second is grants. Sally highlighted the SBIR process. Additionally, there's proof of concept money that's occasionally available through the tech transfer office. Again, grant means you're not giving up control, you're not giving up ownership of the company, And then there's other sources of federal funding as well, including DARPA, NIH, and NSF would be typical targets. Any additional thoughts? Why were you able to do so well in the grant fund?
Well, that's a good question. Let me just say that SBIRs, again, these small business grants, people love them because it looks like free money. But as an example, we started trying to apply for them right after 9/11. So 2001, the telecom market crashes, and then we have 9/11. So we say, great, we'll go to the federal government. We were one of bajillions. So we tried to do this very fancy electronic censoring system for the Army, and they loved it. And they said out of 62 applications for a mere $100,000, there were only 2 excellent technical projects. Yours was one of them. We funded the other guys. So this happens a lot. Again, it is important to put together the right team on the SBIRs. It's very important to work with people who've successfully gotten SBIRs funded before, straight up, particularly with DOD. And that's, Department of Defense, which is where a lot of the money went after 9/11.
A third source of funding is often known as the 3 F's, which are friends, family, and fools. Often by necessity, this is where you go. If you can avoid it, I would just think about, whatever holiday you celebrate, after you've lost that money with your family members, just think about that before you take that on as your first rule of financing. Additionally, these individuals are often sensitive in a financial way to whether you make the return on that investment, okay? Especially if they're not wildly wealthy individuals. And if you lose it, they get angry, and lawsuits sometimes occur. So just be careful. Sometimes by necessity, you've got to use the 3 F's, but if you can, I just exercise some caution with respect to that as a source of funding. That leads to a discussion of angel investors, which tend to be individuals, often high net worth individuals, who will put an investment into your company anywhere from, say, $25,000 to $50,000 in size, up to about $1 million. And an angel round, which could have multiple angel investors in, tends to range anywhere from ballpark $250,000 for a small round, up to a $1 to $2 million angel round. These individuals tend to be a little bit more sophisticated, and as high net worth individuals, they're less sensitive to losing one investment. Doesn't mean they're going to be happy about it, but they are, in my experience, less inclined to come back and chase you for, say, securities fraud after the money goes wrong. I've listed a couple of the angel networks in the area that you might pay attention to if you're interested. There's also a fund out of the business school now called the Deming Fund that does some small angel investment that you might take a look at. Getting a little bit larger, you asked about venture capital money. These are institutions, funds. So for example, in Boulder, the Foundry Group just closed on a $250 million fund, which means they've got limited partners who invest chunks of money into them and say, go find good companies. Okay? And venture capitalists would then come to you and say, wow, fantastic idea, I'll give you $5 million for 40% of your company. Okay? There are good things and bad things about VC. You're going to give up control. You're going to give up a fair amount of ownership in the company. But great angels and great VCs bring what? Expertise, right?
And contacts.
So you talked about Milton Cheng as a mentor, also an investor. Individual or VC?
It was a venture fund.
Okay, so he's working as part of a fund, an institutional investor in your company. What sort of contacts and doors did Milton open? What sort of advice did he give you?
Milton turns out now to be on the board of trustees at Caltech. So when we have worked with Caltech, when we are looking at top candidates out of Caltech, it's very helpful to have a member of the board of trustees who will pick up the phone on any issue for you. He has gotten us entrees into customers that we would like to have. He has, having him just as our backing is tremendous credibility in our industry. So it is again the sense that if Milton trusts them, then we can trust them too.
By and large, a rule of thumb for taking on outside money, don't do it unless you're getting one of 2 things that you absolutely need. One is expertise and advice and connections along the lines with Milton Cheng. Or second, you just can't make the company work with respect to development. You can't make the company work with respect to developing the product or getting to market without that money, but make sure you have a good business reason. And as I said, try, especially if this is your first rodeo, to think about how can you make this work as far as possible without taking on outside investment. Last one, using the campus's resources. Go ahead.
I think there's two sources that have been left off that are important. One is consulting, and the other is corporate R&D money.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They both have their pluses and minuses, but no more than any of those other sources.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So let's talk about consulting as a way of boost. I would fold that under the bootstrapping umbrella. Did you guys do some consulting along the way at all or not?
Not really.
Yes. Okay. Sounds like you've made that work. And your name is?
Alan.
All right, so Alan's got a good insight there in terms of a way to bootstrap without taking on outside money sometimes is to consult along the way. The danger is your consulting time starts to eat up the time that you otherwise would be taking something to market or create a product.
And it's work for hire, which for the most part means that they own the intellectual property you develop. But if you're starting at ground zero, you get an idea of how the business works. If you apply your skills generally to that field, you can keep the lines on.
Really important point here that touches my heart on the Entrepreneur Law Clinic side. If you're working as an independent contractor, I would highly recommend being clear about who gets the IP. Is it the company that's employing you, or do you keep the IP that you've created? Interesting point, by and large, absent a written agreement, the IP will stay with the independent contractor. It's a head fake that a lot of our clients end up blowing their IP on. So if you're on the company side, make sure that you've got a written agreement that says the intellectual property comes over. But if you're on the independent contractor side, just be mindful that if you want to keep the IP, you better be contracting for it. But that's a good point. And then also in terms of outside money coming in, as he said, research and development, sometimes corporations will be interested in a strategic relationship, joint venture. Those can get a little bit tricky as well, so you want to think that through, but that's another source. Yeah.
For angel fund, you gave a ballpark how much money they expect to raise. How much equity they expect to give up in exchange?
Okay, so don't let me give you the head fake. In terms of VC money that can come in, that can range in terms of rounds anywhere from 2 million to literally 100 million. So Network Photonics took on
140.
So the number I gave you guys wasn't too far off. I think I said 150 earlier. Yeah. So just prior to Precision getting off the ground, Steve Georges, really nice guy, bankable entrepreneur, raised 140 million, obviously a bankable entrepreneur, and the market crashes, and so that was a $140 million round that he raised in venture capital. In terms of percentage of how much you can anticipate giving up, short version is new companies are almost impossible to value. None of the traditional valuation metrics work, so it becomes this, and one way or another, the VC will say, I want 40% of the company. Whether he or she is bringing in 2 million or 10 million, it just somehow magically works out to 30 to 40% overall.
Same for an angel, or is that the raise a little better for an angel?
Angel investment, so I think that by and large, now this is stereotyping broad brush strokes, entrepreneurs feel like VCs take too much of the company for the money that they're bringing in. I often see the opposite problem at angel investors, and part of that's the leverage, that the entrepreneur is the promoter, and there's a lot of disaggregated amounts coming in, and so the entrepreneur says $10 million. The problem with that is then 3 years later the entrepreneur goes out to raise another round, and the valuation is actually down when the VCs come in and give it a little bit more of a realistic look, and that's not necessarily good for your early angel investors. So to the extent you take this on, I'd encourage you to get a realistic valuation if you're the entrepreneur.
That's right.
Yes?
Excuse me. You mentioned that you received the venture capital, but you didn't lose control of the company.
Right.
How did you manage to do that?
So they did not, they took less than 50%. So I still got 50% of the voting stock. And so at that point, I can still control. We have we've always had a three-seat board. They took one board seat. We took one board seat. And then we're supposed to have a neutral, a third party who's in the industry, but is not affiliated with either of us. So, did I give up control? No, but I gave up an awful lot.
So I know that we're coming down to the end. Let me make one final point in terms of campus resources that you might be aware of. highlighted in yellow a couple that I'd certainly have on the radar. One is the Technology Transfer Office. Kate Tallman is the Director of Technology Transfer for the Boulder campus. I'll give you my email address at the end of today, and you're welcome to reach me if you want to get to Kate. The Silicon Flatiron Center, as I mentioned at the outset, is housed in the law school. It's all things information technology. And we have an entrepreneurial law clinic there where third-year law students provide free legal help to startups getting off the ground. The price, as I said, is right. It's free. Ideally, we save you from blowing it early. I'm very clear this is not the same as having an experienced attorney on your side. Okay, so an experienced business attorney will be a trusted business advisor who can open doors, who can say, you know, I've seen 32 companies like this, and you might be thinking about ABC. Our students can't do that, and we're slow. But in terms of early stage company issues, it's a great resource to be aware of. And then I've also got listed some other entrepreneurship entities around campus. In the business school is the Deming Center, which is the entrepreneurial arm there. We've talked about the New Venture Challenge. And then eShip within engineering is oriented around helping ventures get off the ground. And the other one that might be relevant for some of you is eSpace, which is oriented around aerospace and entrepreneurship. And I'm happy to follow up if you're wondering about points of contact across campus. Were you able to leverage campus resources? Obviously, to a certain degree, Jill was.
We were out of school, so we didn't. I mean, it would have been a good idea.
So I think we're about ready to turn into pumpkins at 5:15. I've got a few minutes after people want to stay on. I don't know, do you have 5-10 minutes? Okay, so if you want to stay on for 5 or 10, please feel free to, but don't feel held captive or hostage. Please leave it. You want to put a wrap on things here?
We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. Any additional questions?
So you mentioned we had a really positive experience with Chang. Yeah. Did you have any less positive experiences with venture capitalists before that?
Let me count the days. You know, when you go out in a difficult economy, you can hit up 60 different firms, and there will be very little interest. And they're honestly not particularly nice about that. So they give you the brush off, they just won't return your call. So, yeah, just ignore it.
But as far as managing venture capitalists?
I have never taken, we've been really lucky. We took on one investor and friends and family, and I've never had to deal with any other professional investors.
So there was an excellent question from the group that I met with immediately before, which was, I am finishing my PhD. Let's say I finished that, go do research in an emerging company or startup, and it doesn't work after 2 or 3 years. Where is my career at that point?
Personally, I would say nothing but up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, any kind of experience is great. Getting out there and seeing the world and just being able to add experience to the knowledge that you've learned in school, it's really important. We certainly hire straight out of school, but we really like it when people have several more years of experience. It adds to your tool set. It gives you a lot more to work with. So, and even if the place fails, this is fabulous. You've seen the downside. You've seen what can go wrong. I like working with people who've learned to make mistakes, who've learned how to solve that kind of problem. There's a famous story that circulates around our place about the postdoc who came to interview with us, and they said, you know, well, what mistake had you made? Or what's gone wrong? He said, I'm very proud to say that I've always successfully completed every single thing I've tried. No mistakes ever.
Well, you hired it, right?
And the response was, well, you just made your first mistake. Come back to us in 3 years and tell us what you've learned, and we'll talk again.
All right, so if you want to follow up, my email address is, and Sally, I'll leave it to you as to whether you want to do this or not. I'm at Bernthal, BERNTHAL, at colorado.edu. And as I mentioned, the New Venture Challenge kicks off this Wednesday, 6 o'clock in Atlas, and that information is at cunbc.org. If you can't make it this Wednesday, there's other points of entry, including next Wednesday, November 3rd. And Sally?
Yeah, so I'm S. Hatcher, all one word, at precisionphotonics.com. And please feel free to contact me.
Hey, thanks for having us over.
So thank you for coming.